Rich Franklin in the house. And what a time, Rich, what a time to be the vice president of one championship when we are, I don't know, a week or so away from the U.S. invasion, Friday, May 5th, Prime Video, one Fight Night 10. Are you feeling what's running through my veins right now?
Not at all, man. I'm not excited for this at all. It's not like I haven't been working on this thing for the last, I don't know, year and a half. And so no, man, I'm really excited. I was living in Singapore. I lived over there nearly 5 years. I came back when we started working on moving towards our US launch. And this is a culmination of a lot of work in the company finally coming to fruition. We put together an amazing card. This is going to be an awesome Cinco de Mayo, bro.
I know Cinco de Mayo, such a noteworthy fight weekend. I mean, all of pro sports, to be fair, but especially in the fight game, was how important was that part of this equation? Because I know the U.S. launch was a big project for a while. Pandemic got in the way, but to come back on a weekend where people know, let me get my cerveza and let me tune into the fights, that's not a bad deal.
Yeah, I mean, Cinco de Mayo is a big fight weekend just in combat sports in general, and for us. It just happened to, as this thing progressed, kind of be the leading option for us. Like it was a bit of planning and a bit of kind of the stars aligning at the same time.
Well, look, you're in your main event in Colorado here. We've got Demetrius Johnson. We've got Adriano Moraes, the flyweight title trilogy. How much for you, considering how big of a free agent signing Mighty Mouse was, how important was it for him to be featured so prominently in this fight card, let alone being, a trilogy of a killer rivalry here that we're going to see play out?
Well, when you ask a question like that, don't forget you're skipping over a lot of time. DJ had come to Singapore, come to Asia, and competed for quite some time before actually getting to this point. He went through an entire Grand Prix in his weight class and just, I wouldn't say went through the competition. Like he didn't just walk through them easily. He had some tough fights. Wakamatsu was a tough fight for him. And so the Grand Prix was tough, and he earned that belt in the Grand Prix, and then subsequently had now this is the rubber match between him and Adriano. But even that first match out with Adriano wasn't a good outing for him. And so it took him one fight to come in the second fight and solve the puzzle. So if you've seen both of these fights, they pretty much ended in a picturesque, almost identical picture way,
which is crazy, right? I mean, just crazy.
Yeah, and so now it sets the stage perfectly for this trilogy between the two of them. I'm excited. I'm really excited for this matchup, and I know that DJ has teased the idea of retirement.
Yes. On
top of it, so it makes, for me as a fan, it makes this fight a little bit bittersweet because if he is capable of winning the trilogy between the two of them, there's no better way than going out that way in your career on your terms. But man, that's the last time you're going to get to see Demetrius Johnson, arguably the GOAT in the sport, ever compete again.
Yeah, when you hear him say that, and you know how great he still is at 36 among the pound for pound best right now, and obviously we know where he stands historically. I mean, you have to, like, as a businessman, go, man, I hope he wants to hang around. But can you understand where he's sort of at navigating this portion of his career?
Yeah, completely. I mean, listen, when I hear a statement like that, I completely have my fighter hat on, not a businessman hat. And so I know what it's like to be at that age, and you start seeing yourself. For me, fortunately, I left the sport when I was mentally ready to leave the sport before I physically had to. And when you can go out that way, it's much better than having to be forced out when I mean, look, you can never take that first love away from you, right? Like I'm a fighter and a competitor at heart. And so for the rest of my life, I'm gonna miss competition at some level. But to be at a point where I'm like, I've had enough of this, and it's time to move on and do something else. And if DJ's at that point in his career and he's able to go out on a victory, that's great, because it's interesting, like fans in general, if you go out on top, people are always like, oh man, you could have had one more, or you had 2 more good years in you, but then suddenly, like, if you start losing, it's like, you should have walked away. You know what I mean? Like everything is so much clearer in hindsight.
I mean, certainly one of the greatest fighters in history, ambassadors for the sport. I love the synergy of seeing him back here in the main event. What do you think's going on in the mind of Adriano Moraes, though? After being humbled like that in the rematch so quickly, there's got to be that feeling of. I mean, you've been there before. Yeah, let's run this back. Let's turn those tables one more time and close out this rivalry.
I think Adriano should be sitting in a good place mentally. If you go back and you look at the matches, like Adriano did an amazing job controlling the footwork, the distancing, the range, everything in the first match. Obviously, DJ was having a difficult time closing the distance and actually landing punches. And Adriano was being quite offensive. When I watched the second fight between the two of them, Adriano was doing a similar thing with the footwork. Like he was controlling range really well, but he was not being quite as offensive. Like and I think it was the lack of offense there that kept or that allowed DJ to press forward in more of a threatening manner. He was able to finally get in on the inside and land the shots that he landed that set it up for that knee. So it's like, Adriano should be looking at, if I was in his camp, I would be looking at those two films and seeing like what was different between the two, what was different, what made me more tentative to not throw hands, what made me more tentative to not throw kicks or whatever it was to keep Demetrius at bay. But when I look at the footwork, like the series of footwork was all the same, and still up until DJ landed that punch in the second fight in that fourth round, he was having trouble solving the puzzle of Adriano. So if I was in his camp, especially as a coach, these are the things I'd be talking to him about, so that his mentality is where it needs to be for this match. Because the last thing you want is your fighter, your former champ or whatever, questioning his ability to come back in on the third match, coming off of a loss like that.
Yeah, totally understand. And you look up and down this card, and we certainly can look at some of the key matchups, but I see some of the more exciting fighters in this promotion sort of jumping off the screen when I look at this card. Is that part of the strategy on a big event like this? I mean, you guys are trying to put the foot down on U.S. soil and really cement your placement in terms of where this promotion is heading in the larger MMA space. But I see Rodtang, I see Stam Fairtex. I'm like, okay, I got to get there early too, Rich. Right? I mean, I got to see the whole thing here.
Absolutely. Look, I mean, when you look at the card that we put together, this is a great card because Stamp and Rodtang both created a good fan base in the U.S. When we aired in the U.S. A couple years back. But on top of that, we have like other fighters, like, I mean, for example, you want to pull an old name out like Sage Northcutt, someone that people remember. But then the newest signing that we've had is Roberto Soldich, and people have been waiting to actually see him perform. He had one fight and one championship that ended early due to a foul, a knee to the groin, and we weren't able to actually get to see Roberto. So there's a lot of anticipation for him as well. And so when you look at what the competition team has done here, putting the card together, this is a great card. Even the submission grappling matches, I'm really excited for the submission grappling matches. I was doing my film study last night on Renier de Ritter and Ty Rotolo, and I find this submission matchup. I mean, like the Musa Mechi match is a whole beast of its own. He's always fun to watch, and the opponent that they've chosen for him, the IBJJF champ Osama Almarwai, I got to say that properly. It is a great matchup, but like looking at the RDR match, like he had already grappled against Andre Galval, and Galval is Ty Rotolo's instructor. So it's almost like,
synergy there.
Yeah. And I look back at that matchup and watch the two of them grapple and what Ty brings to a grappling match. And I think it's going to be a really interesting match. So top to bottom, this card is, whether you're doing Muay Thai or MMA or grappling or whatever match you're looking at, like these are really good matchups. This is an excellent card and one that definitely will appeal to the U.S. audience.
I didn't want to skip too quickly past that lightweight tilt with Sage Northcutt making the return. First time fighting in 4 years. And we know that the devastating injury he suffered the last time out. He'll be taking on Ahmed Mujaba. But I mean, we were questioning if we'd ever see this guy again. He's always got such an upbeat attitude. I mean, I don't know if there's anyone on this planet in better shape than Sage Northcutt. I mean, I know Oscar De La Hoya is flaunting around fake abs that he had, injected in. I mean, I think Sage had those abs probably when he was 4 years old. But in the mind of a fighter, in the arc of a fighter, man, I give him a lot of credit 4 years after the fact for coming back, because he can't do an interview without people saying, do you think it was too much too soon? Here's a great, talented young fighter, but he did have to endure the lessons learned in the tough road to get back to this point.
Yeah, absolutely. When you come back from an injury like that, especially after this kind of time off, it says a lot about, the what you're made of mentally. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm excited to see Sage come back. And like you said, you want to talk about someone who's just a man of character. Like I really like Sage is a good human being on top of it. So, I'm always rooting for him as well on a return like this, and I think he's going to do really well. And you talk about Sage and his abs, like probably one of the most athletic men on the planet, like just an amazing athlete, the way he's able to move and flip around and things like that. So yeah, it's going to be exciting to see how he comes back in this return. And Chaba is not, I mean, that's not an easy return either. He's surprised us in the organization, quite frankly, with some of his performances as well. So this will be a tough test for Sage after 4 years off.
Rich, when we say how big is this card, how big is this fight card? And I mean that from the standpoint of, I mean, it's not WrestleMania 1 with Vince McMahon mortgaging his financial future and it's got to succeed. But you make the US debut, it's to make a statement. It's to open the doors for future growth in business on US soil. How much pressure are you guys putting on yourselves that this thing lands as hard and loud as you hope it does?
Well, I'll just say this, when it comes to pressure, it's like you got to have a champion mindset, right? Like, people always think like, oh man, it's like you're defending your belt here. Like how much pressure is on you? It's like, well, no more pressure than I normally put on myself, right? We do shows every single day, and now we've come to the US, and so we've put together a great card. We have a great partnership with the Colorado State Athletic Commission there. Coming in, we're able to execute under our rule set. So these are going to be some exciting matches down to the judging and the scoring criteria. So at this point in time, like, with a champion mindset, I just expect this to be a success. Everything up to this point has followed suit the way that it should. And now all we have to do is just sit back and watch the fights. And as long as these fights execute as they should on paper, then it's gonna be an amazing card. And so this is gonna be a great entry in the US. And I believe all these fights are gonna be good. I mean, there's even the opener on the main card, like Jackie Boontan and DeAndre Martin, like this is going to be a good opener as well. And so top to bottom, man, this is going to be a great card. So yeah, we're just going to sit back, and as long as the fights execute the way that they should, then it's going to be an amazing outing. And I think a lot of people in the US who may not have tuned into one championship at this point, I don't know how that could possibly happen, but there are going to be a lot of eyeballs going like, oh wait, this is a great promotion, especially when you see the way that we score, judge, and some of the rule variations that there are to the unified rules.
And you've got a good looking burgeoning country music sensation and Brent Stover calling the fights. I mean, that can't, CBS Sports' his own, that can't hurt, right?
Yeah, you know what? Actually, when Brent was last time or the time before when he was in town, I didn't realize that he had some music on like Apple Music. So I downloaded a bunch of his songs, and he's like, man, thanks. He goes, it's you and my mom that bought those songs now. and maybe like his ex-girlfriend or something. I don't know.
Indeed.
I like working with Brent. He's a good guy.
Absolutely. The First Bank Center in Broomfield, Colorado, just outside of Denver, sold out a couple weeks in advance here. So we know the crowd's going to be fired up. Fans are going to tune in Friday, May 5th on Prime Video for One Fight Night 10. But in talks of this being a success, can you guys be back on US soil in 2023 if all goes well? Is that the plan coming out of next Friday night?
I'll say this, it is definitely a possibility. We don't have we haven't secured any other venues for this year yet, but there's definitely talks of things. And we've been slow on this just for the purpose of letting this execute. Us coming to the United States is, it's been a good learning curve for the company, obviously, because we've never operated in the US. And so there's a lot of things here with state commissions that we've had to learn about for putting an event together. And so once we have this learning curve down, then I think that you're going to see us coming back in the US with a bit more frequency.
All right. Well, hey, there's this free agent out there named Francis Ngannou that everyone keeps asking Chatri about. And, I'm sure every promotion would love to throw their hat in the ring with a heavyweight that decorated. How would Francis fit in the one heavyweight championship division, in your opinion?
Well, I'll tell you what, we have later on this year, we're going to have Arjun Buller and Anatoly Malukin. And
now that's a fight, a unification. I can't wait for that one.
But I'll tell you, when I sit back and think about the matchup between one of those two guys, particularly stylistically, when I think about Malyukin versus someone like Francis, man, like that would be a fireworks kind of heavyweight fight. So yeah, as a fan, I'm sitting here messaging Chachi going, "Hey bud, have you where are we on the Francis talks?"
Yeah, not a bad idea at all. I could totally see why. When it relates to the tough decisions Francis has made, regardless of where he ends up, and I know he wants to box as well, having gone through the days as a fighter and businessman, do you tip the cap to what Francis is trying to do?
I mean, I'm gonna put my fighter cap on here completely. Yeah, you have to, because on the back end, look, this is the fighter life. I wake up now. Sometimes I have a stiff back, a little tight here, a little neck there from all the years of abuse. And so while you're competing, you have to take advantage of those years and do as well as you can financially, because once that closes out, a lot of athletes have difficulty reinventing themselves or finding a placement somewhere in the industry or whatever it is they're going to do to make money. And so it's like the more successful you can be with your finances, the better off you can be down the road, because your money makes money for you rather than you having to work. Unfortunately for me, I'm a college educated guy, and I've been blessed with making good business decisions financially throughout my career, but then post-fight career, I've had a great career with one championship. So things worked out really well for me. But make no mistake about it, I would not have been complaining had I had another decimal place on my paycheck when I was competing as an athlete. So, when there's a fight and people are making money, this is coming from a fighter. At the end of the day, if you're going to fight, you're the one that's going to have the busted up knee or the broken bones or the scar from the stitching and all that kind of stuff 10, 15, 20 years down the road. Not the promoter, not the fans, not anybody else. It's you. And so when I see this across the sports, you see, like, you look at other sports. I mean, when you look at like NFL players, for example, and guys signing $20 million a year contracts, which to me is just absolutely ridiculous that you can make that much money playing a sport. But they're the ones that are going to be with CTE later on down the road, or busted up knees. And we've seen this in the NFL time and time again. And so people are willing to pay the kind of prices that they are for a jersey at a sports store, or a ticket to enter a stadium and all that kind of stuff, and the money is actually there, then it's the athletes that should be making the bulk of the money, because they pay the price later on in life.
Yeah, I say it all the time. I think it's true. We're in the dark ages of overall fighter athlete treatment, and I can't wait to see it continually evolve. When I talk to our fans here on this podcast, Morning Combat, that they do say, "Can we please get more one content?" And I ask why sometimes, Rich, and it seems to be they just love the no bullshit, old school sort of, give me that romanticized Bushido feeling that one gives them. In light of that, what sort of reputation are you most proud of over the past few years? Because I know you've been really behind the scenes working hard along with Shatri and the crew ahead of this event next Friday. What sort of place in the MMA field are you most proud of where one is at right now, for any particular reasons?
There's so many different ways you can talk about this. I think one way is you can talk, like, the respect nature, like the martial arts values of our athletes, I think is a big thing. But on top of that, like, probably it's probably our dedication to pure competition. What we've done with the rule set, and not just like the scoring criteria. I mean, for the people that are tuning in that may not know, like, we score our fights as a one whole, like in its entirety. So it's not scored on a round by round basis. So you can't come in at the end of a round, land a takedown, and quote unquote steal a round. Sure. Or you can't, like, barely win round one and round two, and then blow out round three, but end up losing the fight because you lost 2 rounds to 1. And so there's this scoring criteria. There are other rule differences, like the knees to the head on the ground, for example. I believe that this particular rule, while it was intended to protect the fighters initially, what it does in the organization is it keeps guys from being stale when they're on the ground. You take a shot and get stuffed, you got to keep moving. So it keeps the action moving. And when you look at the way that we judge, our judging criteria, if you were to break it down, it forces the athletes into action. And I think that's part of the reason why we have a good 70% finishing rate within the organization, which is a very high finishing rate in this industry. But then there are other
Absolutely.
things that we do on the other side of the coin that One Championship does really well, where we actually put the athletes first. We have our hydration and weigh-in protocol, and it's us doing the best that we can to keep the athletes from doing these drastic weight cuts that they've done in other organizations, like what I did throughout my entire career. Basically, on fight week, I'm dropping down 20 plus pounds, losing about somewhere between 10 and 15% of my body weight, and then putting it back on right before the fight. So we pretty much tried to completely eliminate that for athletes, and so that they can perform at optimal levels. It's not only about performance, but it's so much healthier for them as far as like organs, particularly the brain, when it comes to rehydration and the damage that like concussion protocols and whatnot. And on those lines, we also have like we're I believe the only organization, the only major organization in the world that does fight week CTs. So we during fight week, I mean, as an organization, if you've ever run an event or been part of an event for a major organization, there's a lot going on during fight week. And so we have medical protocols that we have to adhere to as according to whatever state commission or whatever country we're going to. But above and beyond that, we have our athletes do fight week CTs. So whatever they have done in their medicals weeks out of the event, we say they could have taken some head trauma a week before they're about to fight. And we just want to make sure that their brain is in good shape going into fight week. And early on, when we started first implemented this, we actually had athletes on the roster where we end up having to pull them out of fights. And so there is this idea of, particularly with fighter safety first with these athletes. So, the organization itself, when you talk about the no BS attitude, it is about going back to putting on good fights and making sure the athletes are as safe as possible. And it's just interesting when you come to the US that people are not used to seeing things like knees to the head on the ground. They're immediately like, oh, whoa, that's so brutal. I'm like, yeah, I could actually, argue the contrary on that. And that's not necessarily what this particular interview is about, but all those things in consideration, that's something that I'm really proud of, having worked with this organization for so many years.
You covered a lot of great items there on the list that I think, a lot of the fans could find refreshing in response, particularly to what fans sort of default call pride rules. Like you're saying, the idea of scoring a whole fight as opposed to rounds. Do you think that's something that could catch on across all of elite US mixed martial arts? I mean, down the road?
It should. Let me explain the concept like in a different manner for people, because I was actually thinking about this last night. So imagine if you're watching the NBA finals, game one ends by a point, suddenly like you lose, like, I don't know, LeBron is out for the first 3 games of the NBA finals. He's injured. And then, and LA loses by 1 point in the first game, 3 points in the second game, and 2 points in the third game. And then suddenly LeBron comes back and he's able to play the last several games, whatever. But then you just keep the cumulative score of the 7 games at the end. And LA ends up winning by, I don't know, 47 points over the, cumulatively over the next 4 games total. And it's like, well, it should just be a continuation of the time, right? They're just like, game 2 is just a continuation of game 1. And so if you've lost by 10 points, you just started a 10-point deficit and keep moving from there and just see where it ends up at the end. That's kind of how scoring is in for us. Like when the 5-minute round ends, it's boom, the bell goes. And when minute 6 of the fight starts, you're just picking right back up where you left off. So the judges have this cumulative scorecard. And I do believe that this is a superior way of judging. You can go back and look at, for example, my Dan Henderson matchup, that the scoring on that fight. There was 2 judges that scored that 29-28 in favor of him, and one judge that scored it 30-27 in favor of me. And I think that when you're having to choose who won a particular round, for that matter, I mean, first of all, if you add those points up, I think I end up winning anyway. But if it was just like points by points rather than,
but who's counting, Rich? Really?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Clearly not me.
Yeah.
But no, I've given a lot of thought to this, just as it applies to the career. Not something that I'm necessarily salty about with my career, but it's like when you look at things like that, it's like, well, I've thought, and I've rewatched that fight, and I thought, well, how would that have been scored under One Championship criteria? I mean, at the end of the day, 2 people can look at 2 fighters at the end of the round or at the end of a fight, and this is what I always tell myself: if I was one of these two fighters going home tonight, sleeping in bed, which one would I rather be? Like, which one's
Yeah.
more beat up, right? I mean, like, you know, it's schoolyard rules, and I think that we're kind of closer to that in the end when it comes to scoring, is that it's more accurate rather than, you know, having, like I said, having 2 rounds barely skated out by one person, then blown away in the third, and they're just torn all to pieces. And it's like, well, that falls under the damage criteria of our scoring, and you know, you controlled a good portion of the round, so that's obviously going to weigh out more than you just kind of barely squeaking out round 1, round 2 with a takedown.
Yeah, no, I get it. I that's one of the major things I wonder, 10 years from now, will we look back and say, wow, once that change happened across the board universally, if it ever does, boy, it's like a before and after. I mean, in some ways, the sport is still so young, 30 years in, that key rule changes, could positively, have such a long-term effect across the board, whether it's weight cutting, hydration, whether it's scoring and all of that. But Rich, I could keep you all day, and one time we got to get you on the couch and go deep on the career. And I could ask you many key questions about the career, but no one ever asked you about the teaching career anymore. You missed that, Rich? Because that's how a lot of us first, it was Pink Tights, it was the documentary, and it was this teacher turned fighter. That's Ace Franklin to me right there. You miss those days?
I do. And I had no other option but fighting, because when I was wearing pink tights in the classroom, I really got in trouble by the administration. And so I had to find a career basically just due to my wardrobe selection. But no, I do. And it's interesting that you asked this, because at this point in my life, I've kind of realized that I think God designed me to be a teacher. Even when we're having this discussion right here, if you were to go back and listen to this, I'm educating the audience about a rule system, or about a judging criteria, about a hydration protocol, or whatever. And I actually enjoy doing this. And so while I may not be in the classroom teaching you the quadratic equation at this point in time, I found that in my life, and in most of the discussions that I get into, whether it's publicly or just privately for that matter, like, I am a teacher at heart. And that was my intention when I started my podcast, is like, I have information and I want to disseminate information and just make people think about things. And at that point in time, you can, I sit and made a case for our scoring criteria, our judging criteria, as judging the fights as a whole. And so I want people to walk away going like, this made sense, or you know what, I don't agree with him. I think he's full of a bunch of baloney, and here's the reasons why. But either way, at least you're thinking about something. And that's something that it was just innately, like, God put that in me. And I don't think that I can escape that for the rest of my life, no matter what it is that I do. So at some level, I will always be a teacher. And it is not, trust me, I don't ever hesitate when I see a young kid, like, kind of like sitting there with their math textbook, like, hey, what are you working on? Do you need some help? It's crazy. It's the way that I am. I'm at my church. I've helped several of the kids that went through high school when they were struggling in geometry or something like that. People were like, hey, could you help so-and-so out with them? I'd love to. So I'll say this: teaching is a really tough career. Teachers are oftentimes underappreciated for, it's like, I like teaching. I don't think the art of teaching is a tough career in itself, but the environment in which we have to teach now, with just, the way that, the way that youth is and everything, it's difficult to deal with that in a classroom. And you have these days where you go in as a teacher and you feel either unappreciated or underappreciated. And then you have this one day where you go in and you have a student or a few students that are like, man, Mr. Franklin, thank you so much for helping me with this. If it wasn't for you, I would have never passed my graduation equivalent exam, or, whatever it is. And that day has to carry you through all the other BS. What I mean? It's like a fight, like landing that one big punch has to carry you through that storm that you weathered to get there.
Yes.
And that's what teaching is like, really, on a daily basis. And so, you have to, you see a high burnout rate with educators, and you have to go in every day and kind of convince yourself, like, I'm making a difference. And that's what makes it tough being a teacher.
Well, I'm sure there's a bunch of Oak Hills alumni who still say, man, Mr. Franklin was cool, and Mr. Franklin could kick your ass. Indeed. Rich Franklin, the ace in the hole, the ace hole. Well, maybe that's not the right nickname.
What? It sounds good to me, man.
That works.
Let's just roll with it.
All right. Well, we'll roll with it. Friday, May 5th. Prime Video. It's One Fight Night 10. It's the U.S. invasion. We got Rod Tang. We got Mighty Bus. We got Adriano. We got Sage. I mean, there's so much across the board. Rich, thanks for taking the time to break this all down. A big date in the company's progression, and I'm happy to see it.
Yep. Awesome. I can't wait for the future.